Hey, what's up guys? Joker here. Today we're going to be doing our Fallout 4 performance review. Now, I've run the game on my 980 Ti's, I've run it on the R9 380 for AMD, I've also run it on my GTX 970, and the R9 380 and the 970 were running in my test rig. The 980 Ti's obviously in my main rig with the 5820K. We're going to talk about GPU performance, how the CPU factors into all of it, as in my test system I am running an i5, which I'm actually seeing a significant bottleneck with on Fallout 4, and we're going to talk about all of that in just a little bit. First things first, we're going to talk about the options menu for this game. So unlike a lot of other games, or most games out there, we actually have to do our graphics options outside the game in this context menu that opens up here. So coming in here, you can see we do have resolution support for up to 1440 in here. It does go up to 4K though. If you have a 4K monitor, you don't have to worry about that. I have read around on the forums as far as 21:9 support is concerned, which I don't have on hand right now to test, but I should pretty soon. It's my understanding that it's not natively supported at launch, but don't 100% quote me on that, but that's what I've heard on the forums from people out there. Also in here, we do have our anti-aliasing support, which only has FXAA and TAA, which is temporal anti-aliasing. I would have liked to have seen more options here. I know testing the game at 1080p, anti-aliasing on this game does not look very good. There's definitely a lot of controversy about the graphics in this game. I honestly think most of them look pretty nice, especially the lighting and the detail of the world, but Fallout games have never really been about the graphics. But I know there's a lot of people out there just like they don't care about that. They don't want to hear excuses. They just want their games to look amazing. And, you can't really please everyone, and I'm pleased with this game, even though I'm a massive graphics whore. I'm pleased with the way that this game looks. I think it looks fantastic, regardless of, some of the textures in the world not looking very good. I think the total package does look quite nice. But moving on from there, we do have Anisotropic Filter, and goes all the way up to 16 times, and then we're going to come into our advanced options. We do have options here for windowed mode or borderless, and then we have presets here for low, medium, high, and ultra. But going into our advanced options, we have two tabs in here, just like we saw on the leaked options menu that I did go over a couple weeks back. On the details here, we got our texture, shadow, decal, lighting, shadow distance, lighting quality, God rays quality. That's the NVIDIA God rays, and this is a real killer right here. You can see I even have it set to medium, because running on 980 Ti, if I had this fully maxed out, it was actually giving me quite a performance hit when I was going through some of the forest area, where it has really dense foliage, and that lighting was really cutting through the trees and the fog and all that. So I've opted to keep it at medium, which has kept my frames above 60 on 980 Ti at 1440p. These are the settings I'm using right now consistently. Depth of field goes as high as bokeh. Best quality is bokeh on that, so I've got that set up to the highest one. Ambient occlusion goes up to SSAO, no HBAO, unfortunately. We do have screen space reflections, wetness, rain occlusion, motion blur, and lens flare. Motion blur I have off, as I mentioned numerous times in the past. Just don't like the way motion blur looks. And I'm sure some people out there aren't going to like the way God rays look either, and going to want to turn that off completely. And it's honestly probably going to give you the best performance, as I suggest here, because God rays is probably one of the most impactful options you will come across in here to hit your frame rate. If you're having any frame rate issues on your graphics card, on your system, just go ahead and lower down God rays or turn it off completely and see what you get from there, because you may be able to keep everything else turned up and just have to turn that down. At least that's what the case was for me. Coming over to view distance, we have different sliders for all of the different fade objects. We have object fade, actor fade, grass fade, and item fade, which everything's maxed out for me, not having any issues there. Distant object detail and object detail fade, these go all the way low to ultra, and I've got these cranked up all the way at the highest that they will go. But let's go ahead, jump into the game now. We'll talk about performance on the two systems, the various graphics cards, and some other things in there, as well as the SLI, which I talked about yesterday, getting it to work kind of. Didn't really work perfectly, as it turns out. But let's go ahead and jump into the game now, and we'll talk about all that. So before we move on to talking about the performance of the game, I also wanted to touch on the fact that there's no FOV slider in the game as it stands right now. You do have to go into the config and tweak that, which you can do. There's a lot of guides out there. If you want to find out how to do it, just go over to PCGamingWiki.com. They have guides for all the fixes that you might need for this game. A lot of people have also reported the game is capped at 60 FPS right out of the box. Unfortunately, I haven't had this issue, actually. Maybe it's because I'm running a 144Hz screen and it's capping at my monitor's native refresh rate, but I have not had a cap at 60. I haven't had any issues with it running over 60. I don't see the game being sped up. I don't have any physics issues or anything like that. I just played the game day one, and the game has been running over 60 FPS for the majority of the time, unless I come into some odd areas where my frames do dip down. Now, I posted a guide yesterday about how to get SLI working in this game, and initially it was working pretty well. I was getting about 80% usage on each card, and I was getting a decent boost in performance, about 20 to 25 FPS right in that starting area. But as soon as I got out into the wasteland and left the vault, that's where some of the performance issues started to come in and impact me on that SLI setup, and it was sometimes getting even less performance in SLI than it was on single card. It wasn't entirely stable, so that's why I ended up turning it off and disabling it. So if you're out there and you're still using the SLI fix and it's working great for you, good, awesome, but I just wanted to report it to you guys, my findings later on, that it was not holding up great. As far as running on one 980 Ti in the i7 rig, the game is running reasonably well. There are some areas where it just hitches down, even with the quality settings that I'm using with the God Raise It Medium, where it'll just drop down to like 55, 60, or 50, 55, 45 FPS. Mostly I would say that this is in the cities where you're starting to see a lot of the detail creeping in, and the CPU usage starts to ramp up to around 50% usage. Out in the majority of the wasteland, though, my CPU usage is relatively low, about 25-30% on that i7, and it's scaling very well across all the threads. It's using all of the i7's threads. It's using the main cores as well as the hyper-threading. So if you are out there running an i7, you're going to see a full benefit of all that hyper-threading in Fallout 4, which is good to see. Unfortunately, on the i5, I've seen a massive bottleneck with my performance going up to high as 90% usage on the CPU, and my GPU not really being able to go over about 50 to 60% usage because of that, because it's being bottlenecked by the i5 on the GTX 970, which they actually put out as an EVGA Fallout 4 graphics card. They have one with the Pip-Boy on the box and everything, which they're saying is the Fallout 4 graphics card. Oddly enough, the 970 was hitting some serious bottlenecks, though, because of the i5. It was running 60 FPS most of the time if I was standing still, but as soon as I would start moving around and those decals and everything were loading in inside the city, I would start to see my frames dip down to about 45. Out in the wasteland, it wasn't as much as an issue, but really in those cities was really where I started to see the massive performance hit. And no matter what I did to the graphics options, I was just seeing, my performance tanking as far as what the frame rates were that I was getting, and compared to what the GPU was being utilized, it really didn't match up because the GPU wasn't being pushed all the way. Even if I were cranking up to 1440, I was getting about the exact same performance, and that's really just telltale of the CPU as being a bottleneck there. So if you're out there running an i5, you should know that ahead of time, that could be an issue with Fallout 4. So if you have a higher end GPU like a 970 and you're plugging away at an i5 and you're like, why are my frames in the toilet? It's probably because you're being limited by a quad core. This game really does take advantage of multiple cores, multiple threads, hyper threading, all of that, so you guys should definitely know that ahead of time. Running it on the R9 380, it wasn't any better than 970. It was running worse than 970, which I expected. It's not as good a card as a 970, so I didn't really expect it to do better or even on par, but it was running pretty close actually to what the 970 was doing, because once again it was being limited by that i5. So even the i5 6600K, the Skylake processor, which I've overclocked to 4.9 gigahertz, was really getting pushed at 1080 and 1440 in Fallout 4, especially in the cities. So that's something you guys really need to know about Fallout 4 going into it, is that their recommended requirements saying that you kind of need an i7 to push this game at the highest qualities if you want to get 60 FPS. That's definitely holding true in this particular title. So overall, I have to say that I'm not incredibly pleased with the performance of Fallout 4 at launch here on the PC. We don't have SLI support right now as it stands, or Crossfire support for that matter. The graphics cards aren't being fully pushed in my i5 system because it's being limited by that CPU, which I really feel that it shouldn't, because I've played other open world games before where it wasn't as much of a limitation. Even GTA 5 was not as much of a limitation as to where I found it was in this game, whereas my i7 is only running about 25-30% usage most of the time in a lot of these areas, but the i5 is just really getting hammered at like 70-90% usage, and that's just not allowing the GPU to scale up. Unfortunately, I wish I had an i7 in there so that I could test it a little bit further with those graphics cards, but this is the performance that I've seen on an i5, so I'm not overall impressed with the performance of Fallout 4, but I'm thoroughly enjoying the game. Like, the game is absolutely amazing if you have a high-end rig that can push it out, or if you're okay with running on sub 60 FPS some of the time if you're on lesser hardware. If you're even on an i5 Skylake processor, you could definitely see a bottleneck there. So I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. Sorry I didn't have, better news about the performance of Fallout 4. But outside of that, like I said, the game is absolutely fantastic. I've completely been sucked into this game. I'm enjoying it immensely. I'm already into this, I would say, more than I was at Witcher 3. earlier in the year, which, you know, even I would say arguably looks better and runs better, then this game definitely runs better than this game, actually, without a doubt, and looks better. So there's some optimization issues there, definitely, with Bethesda on this engine. I really feel like they needed an update to this engine on this title, but they didn't want to do it, I guess. Kind of wanted to stick with what they know, so that's a bit unfortunate, but the game is incredible otherwise, and I'm still enjoying it, and I hope that you guys are as well. Let me know what you think about it down in the comments below as far as the gameplay and your performance that you're seeing on your systems, to know if that matches up with what I've seen on my i5 as well, especially if you're running an i5. But I'm going to go ahead and get out of here now, guys. Don't forget to stick a thumbs up on this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to see more performance reviews like this, and I will catch you next time. Turtle.